Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 18th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about Kevin McCarthy and the Republican Party's efforts to win back the House majority in 2022 and how they are showing to be increasingly way more confident than they had been in the past about actually reclaiming the majority in just around a year and a quarter before we actually start to see the initial results for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, Kevin McCarthy is the House minority leader. He is the Republican leader, so he actually serves to be the face of the GOP and is largely expected to be next in line to become Speaker of the House, if not Nancy Pelosi or another Democrat. And coming up in 2022, the Democratic Party just recovered after 2020 with a number of losses across the United States, which Kevin McCarthy actually points out in a reason as to why he thinks that he will do well in 2022 and why the GOP will be able to regain the House majority. And as you take a look at this very interesting time period for the American public, where Joe Biden just went from being in that honeymoon period where he was able to hold on for months now to a point where now he's actually starting to be debated and starting to be disliked heavily by many people across the United States. In addition, we are looking at a new type of change within the generic ballot. Previously, 2 months ago, Democrats were ahead by 8-9 points. Today, they are only ahead by 2-3 points and sometimes are in the negative. All around, with everything happening in Afghanistan, everything happening across the United States, there is a recall effort in California. We now have a resignation from the fourth most populous state. That governor, the Democratic governor there, Andrew Cuomo, will be resigning from his office of the governorship. So looking around the nation, a lot happening American political wise, and the Democratic Party is in a very vulnerable position for 2022. So what does Kevin McCarthy actually say when he talks about the change in Democratic support across the nation and when they actually realized that they would have a very good chance at winning? And it says here that the pivotal moment was when Ron Kind, the representative from Wisconsin, who I actually covered just a few days ago, talking about his retirement, was the moment in which Kevin McCarthy knew that Republicans would be winning back that House majority in 2022. And you can see here that Kevin McCarthy is very big on his political party, pointing out a number of things that are attributes as to why the GOP will be able to pretty much play on the offense and not really play defense, as the Democratic Party will be largely expected to. Now, before we get into more details about what Kevin McCarthy actually says in terms of targeting the Democratic Party, understand exactly how close 2020 put the House of Representatives. Right now, Republicans have 213 seats. Democrats have 222. In 2018, the House election results looked much better for Democrats, 235 for the Democratic Party and 199 for the GOP. The Democratic Party was largely expected to gain seats after the 2020 election. And the fact is, Republicans won every single one of their seats where they had incumbents and won every single toss-up race. I kid you not, every single race. Democrats suffered numerous losses across the country and were in a position where they potentially could have lost the House majority to the GOP, which could have proved to throttle them heavily when it came down to a lot of the votes that have pretty much been decided by party line. In addition, this narrow House majority benefits the GOP by throttling the Democratic Party just because of how narrow this majority actually is. Just 4 to 5 representatives saying that they won't vote in the affirmative with Pelosi and other Democrats puts them in a position of power. Previously speaking, for example, the Squad, which is comprised of 4 members of the House of Representatives, in 2018, after those election results, you wouldn't exactly expect them to hold a lot of political prominence when it comes down to leveraging the House of Representatives entirely. But 4 is exactly the amount of House of Representative seats that the Democratic Party has above the needed requirement to reach control of the House of Representatives, which means that Democrats can't really afford to lose those 4, especially with vacancies across the nation. They need every single vote, and 2020 just made it so much more difficult for Democrats to pass sweeping pieces of legislation without a lot of infighting within the GOP. And you're actually starting to see it happen here between progressive Democrats and blue dog Democrats when it comes down to infrastructure. But point being that the 2020 election results put the House of Representatives in a much more competitive position than the 2018 House elections. In 2010, Republicans were still able to regain the majority with such a disadvantageous map given to them after 2008. In 2008, the Democratic Party won over 250 House seats, yet the GOP flipped 63 seats, enough to win back control of the chamber. It was quite interesting to see just how many seats the GOP actually gained over the Democratic Party. Quite phenomenal, to say the least. The amount of turnout, the amount of support that the GOP had across this nation was completely insurmountable. The Democratic Party really did not see this coming. It completely blindsided them, and Democrats lost almost every single competitive race, as they did in 2020. The lucky thing for Democrats in 2020 was that these districts, many of them, were drawn more favorably for Democrats for this past decade. But now, speaking of redrawing, the GOP also maintains an advantage there, which Kevin McCarthy also mentions when it comes down to a number of reasons as to why he believes that the Democratic Party will be in an unfortunate position. He mentions that since the first time since 1994, which I want you to understand the context of that election, that was Bill Clinton's first midterm. That was in a midterm election in which the Democratic Party actually lost control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years. 4 decades had passed, multiple presidents had passed, and the Democrats remained in the majority in the House of Representatives until 1994. Many people put it as the Republican Revolution. Many Democrats actually switched over to the Republican Party. So all around, it was just a very bad time period for the Democratic Party. And 2020 can be compared in that regard, that not a single Republican incumbent lost since 1994 until 2020, when that was matched in terms of that type of energy. So just looking at the comparison there, it's a pretty big one, to say the least. And they talk about how, the Democrats have some of these voters that are, representatives that are retiring, and how there is going to be a number of veterans on the ballot, some type of historically large amount of women running for Republican representatives. So looking at what he is talking about here, essentially trying to fight the Democratic Party with a number of sort of identity issues with women and veterans, trying to build that argument for their candidates because of their experience that they have in the United States military, or trying to show that the GOP is diversifying in terms of who actually runs their party, who actually is going to be the representation of the Republican Party. So all around, McCarthy hits every single point and is correct about all of it. If you're taking a look at the House election results from 2020, you know just how narrow this majority is. All the Republican Party needs to win is 5 seats, and in 2010, they got 63. And Joe Biden, like I said, his approval rating will be a huge determining factor as to how well the GOP does in terms of their 2022 House election results. We've seen a model from Emory University that shows if Democrats are able to win the generic ballot by 10 points, only then will they retain the House majority. Anything below 9 or 10 points, the Democratic Party loses the House majority. That's because looking at the generic ballot, Democrats are in this position where even in 2020, when they won the House of Representatives generic ballot by over 3 points, it was not enough to prevent them from losing 15 seats across the United States. I mean, just because the Democrats were able to win the popular vote did not mean much. And because of redistricting and Joe Biden dipping in approval, that's why they need that bump with that generic ballot victory of 9 to 10 points. But it obviously seems to be something that just isn't possible right now, with Democrats only pulling ahead by at most 2-3 points. Also, in 2018, a much better year for Democrats, they only won this generic ballot by 9 points. So if you're looking at the results, 2018 was a much better year for Democrats, and even then, they couldn't hit 10%, and actually didn't, in fact, hit 9%. I'm rounding up when you get to that 9 percentage point number. And I also mentioned Joe Biden's approval rating deteriorating because you can actually see here now that for the first time, we are seeing a consistent crossover between approve and disapprove in various polls. We have seen the first time that pollsters besides Rasmussen reports have released numbers that show Joe Biden in such an unfortunate position when it comes down to the disapproval rating rising heavily and the approval rating rising or decreasing at a pretty steady rate. If you're taking a look at an issue-by-issue basis, Real Clear Politics also shows a very similar result to the approval rating. Issue by issue, the economy. Joe Biden's approval rating has certainly deteriorated. All positives now starting to hit the negatives. Immigration has been negative for quite some time, started out positive. The issue of the coronavirus started out much higher, plus 40, plus 36, plus 35, now down to plus 2, plus 12, plus 24, plus 12. The reason being the resurgence of COVID-19, the Delta variant, upping mask mandates, schools potentially not opening, virtual schools, whatever it might be. all around, Joe Biden promised to be a transformative type of president when it came to COVID-19, largely was for the beginning of his term, but starting to fall off as America starts to be in just as bad of a position as we were during holiday season of 2020. And also the issue of foreign policy, an issue that Joe Biden was actually highly respected on from the very beginning of his presidency, starting out with plus 20, even recently, back in July, plus 12, according to the Hill-Harris X poll. Today, that number is down to 1.4%, and you can start to see a very dramatic decline, especially with Afghanistan starting to become a very big important issue for 2022, or not necessarily for 2022, but at least for voters at right now. So it seems to be the perfect storm for the GOP, which is why Kevin McCarthy seems to be very confident in the GOP's chances at winning, saying that this is like the 100-year storm. Essentially, that just puts this in a position where 2022 could be that dramatic overhaul of certain types of agendas by an incumbent political party, of course, in this case, the Democratic Party, and how that would be some type of monumental indicator of a change in public sentiment towards both political parties and benefiting the GOP overall. And I mentioned redistricting because redistricting holds a major role on 2022. You see, in the 2022 midterm elections, all of these states after the census dropped are required to redraw their congressional districts, which means that districts such as Oklahoma's 3rd and Texas's 11th likely won't look the same. There are very few states that are single district states, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, which means that they won't be redistricting. Montana actually gaining a district, so they will be redistricting. But point being, that there are very few states that actually haven't or are not required to redistrict simply because they don't have the seats for it. But for many of these states, very populous ones, it takes a while to redraw these congressional districts. But they are typically done by whichever political party is in control in terms of the state legislature and in terms of the governorship. For Republicans in 2020, they were able to actually flip state legislatures from Minnesota to New Hampshire. In addition, they won numerous governorships back in 2018. The Democrats, I can tell you right now, are very upset that Republicans have control of that. Because here's our map. In terms of who controls redistricting, Republicans are in red, Democrats are in blue. You see the lack of Democrats across the nation. Larger states such as California, Michigan, states that you might expect to be Democratic states based off their electoral history, Washington, Virginia, understand that the reason why they are green is because they have independent commissions. What does that mean? Essentially, nonpartisan committees will get together and redraw the districts to be fairer, to make them more beneficial for the voters in the certain states. And I just find it to be quite interesting to see that looking at these independent commissions, they are primarily in Democratic states. The only states that are Republican states that have them are Idaho and Montana. Every single one of the rest ones are in Democratic states. Democrats really, I would say, prompted this by trying to push other Republican states to follow suit, but none of them really have followed suit outside of Idaho and Montana. But taking a look at some of these more populous states, you can see here that the GOP has around a 100-seat advantage when it comes down to pure redistricting. For example, Florida and Texas, Republicans quite literally, combined with these two states, could overturn the Democratic majority simply through gerrymandering both Florida and Texas, because all the GOP needs is 5 seats, and they will absolutely get it if they gerrymander both Florida and Texas. And do I expect them to? Absolutely. This is the standard type of political process where Democrats and Republicans come together and they gerrymander into oblivion because they know that both political parties are going to be actively partaking in it. They fight fire with fire in every single step that they can get, except this time the Republican Party has a lot more of a flame than the Democratic Party does, around a 100-seat advantage when it comes down to redistricting. So it's redistricting, it's the lessening Biden approval rating, it's numerous scandals across the nation for Democrats, Andrew Cuomo. You have Gavin Newsom, you have other Democrats that are in vulnerable positions, and you also have the historical precedent about what type of year 2022 will be. Republicans have already proven their worth both in 2010 and 2014, as Democrats did in 2018. The unfortunate reality for Democrats in 2022 is that Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States. Democrats no longer have this heavy set of ammunition, and while they will certainly use it, and it will be some type of ammunition, obviously the voting groups wouldn't be as inspired to vote in 2022 for Democrats as they were in 2018. So when I take a look at what might happen in 2022, Kevin McCarthy is right to be confident in the GOP's chances of reclaiming the House majority. I've long said for the past 6-7 months that I widely expect the GOP to reclaim the House majority. It's only a matter of time before you start to see more generic ballot polls put Republicans ahead. And even if Democrats are ahead by 2-3 points, we know now, because of the studies from Emory University and other political firms, that a 2-3 point margin of victory on the popular vote simply will not cut it. It never really cuts it when it comes down to the individual parts of it. So looking at the House of Representatives elections in 2022, I widely expect the GOP to do well across this country. And Kevin McCarthy hits almost every single point that I need to make when it comes down to these House elections. So all in all, we will see. Maybe the race might take a tricky turn, but it seems that so far, it's the start of a perfect storm for the GOP and their ability to reclaim the House majority come November 2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.